Welcome to the NC Choices webinar series, Teaching Tools for Beginning Farmers, funded by the United States Department of Agriculture's Beginning Farmer and Rancher Development Program. I'm Matt Poore, and I'm going to be presenting the module on beef cattle production management. This is one of 7 modules offered in this webinar series. In this presentation, we'll talk about reproductive management for beef cattle. If you're interested in other resources offered by NC Choices, you can find out more on our website or on our YouTube channel. So today's presentation will cover reproductive management of beef cattle. Reproduction is critical for the success of a pasture-based beef production system. Some farmers only use calves that have been obtained from other farms that run cows, but many of the farms will have cows of their own, and therefore it's very important that they understand the reproductive process. Cows need to breed on an annual cycle. The gestation length in cattle is about 280 to 285 days, and that means that the cow only has 80 to 85 days after she calves to rebreed to maintain that annual cycle of production. Bulls need to be very active and ready for the breeding season so that they can handle up to 40 cows over a short period of time. Nutrition is critical for cows to breed back quickly and to keep on this cycle, as was presented in the nutrition presentation. And heifer development is another key for efficient production. These young females need to be managed well so that they can go back into the herd and become productive cows. There are many reproductive technologies out in the beef industry, and I'll present those in a little bit of detail, but they're probably not best for beginners. There are many other things about the production system that you need to learn before using these advanced technologies. The first important concept is that we need to have a controlled breeding season for the cow herd. This allows us to easier manage the calves at animal processing, to more efficiently watch our cows and assist them when they're calving, and it also allows us to target the best time of year for those calves to be born on our farm. Fall calving is quite common in the eastern region when calves are born sometime between September and December. This allows better weather for calving, less chance of a serious snowfall or ice event, but it has the disadvantage that we will have lactating cows during the winter, and so their nutrition needs to be considered. Spring calving is common in some parts of the country, especially in the west and the northern regions, and this would occur between April and June. Now, this allows very good weather for calving, being late spring and on into the summer. And it's very good for forage nutritive value. The forage will oftentimes be of its highest quality and quantity during the springtime of the year. However, in North Carolina and much of the eastern U.S., it is not recommended except for in the mountains. Other than that, the disadvantages and the advantages of the system point towards other calving seasons. Winter calving is very common in our area as well, and this occurs between January and March. And many people will call this spring calving, but of course, those are winter months. Now, the potential for weather problems is there with that type of a system where a large weather event could cause you problems with the survival of those baby calves. But it is a better system for getting the cows bred back than the spring calving. The problem in our area with spring calving is that the breeding season becomes the middle of the summer, and it's much too hot in North Carolina for cows to efficiently reproduce during that time of the year. With winter calving, while we do have those weather problems, we can get the cows rebred simply because the bulls are turned out in April when forage quality is usually pretty good. Now, in terms of what we do to get cows bred, most commercial producers use what we call natural cover, meaning that we use a bull to breed the cows. The bull to cow ratio is usually between 1 and 25 up to 1 and 40, meaning that one bull can breed from 25 to 40 cows. Now that's a mature bull. Young bulls can breed fewer cows, and the rule of thumb we use is 1 cow per month of age of the bull after he's 12 months old. So a bull is not ready to breed until he's 12 months old, and then could only breed 12 cows at that age. When he's 24 months old, 2 years, he could breed 24 cows, and then that would top out at about 40 cows, a little over 3 years of age. Bulls should always have a breeding soundness exam before being put with cows, and we'll talk about that in more detail. Small producers and beginning producers especially find that managing the bull becomes a problem for them, because it's very common for these producers to only have one bull, and then having that bull stand around for most of the year by himself oftentimes causes problems. They're not happy like that. They want to get out. They want to be with cows. And so storing that bull for an extended period of time becomes a challenge. So we have some producers that go into what we call bull sharing arrangements, where they share a bull with other producers and just have a little bit different calving seasons. There are also lease programs for bulls for small producers that just want to have a bull during the breeding season and then return it to the breeder in the off season. Now, both of those sound like good ideas for getting a good bull and not having to have them for the whole year, but these programs require a very high level of health program, and it's best if the farmers have a uniform approach to their health programs that are either sharing or the bulls that they're leasing for their breeding season. Now, if we look at the basic annual cow cycle, it's shown here on this diagram, and we'll see kind of another alternative to this in a minute. But one thing that we know is to keep these cattle on this 365-day cycle, we need to manage their body condition. In other words, we need to keep them with a little bit of fat in their body composition. We want most of the cows to calve early in the season so that they have extra time to breed back. We want to feed to maintain the body condition of the cows after calving, and we want to maintain a good mineral supplementation program. Now, one thing to keep in mind, as shown on this slide, cows are most fertile on their third cycle after they start returning to heat, after the calves are born. And having a calf early in the season allows a cow to have several cycles before the bull is put in and she's exposed to the bull. And this gives us a very high percentage of calves born early in the breeding season. In contrast to that, if we don't have a cow start cycling for quite some time, in this example 85 days after the bull is introduced, then they may not conceive until the third cycle after that, and that would put them on a much too long cycle to maintain their annual cycle. If these cows continue to have a long interval between calving and the time that they're bred back, then they will have lower efficiency and will be culled from the herd for being open at some point. They will not be cycling at the point that the bull is removed from the herd. So very important that these cows cycle early and that the bull is ready to breed them when they do calve. Now, I don't want to give you a lot of detail here, but I do want to introduce you to the reproductive anatomy of a bull. And so that's listed here. I will not repeat all the parts, but we do have the accessory glands that are around the system that help to build the semen that goes out and fertilizes the cow. Of course, the semen starts in the testicle and it moves up. You'll notice the penis on the bull has what we call the sigmoid flexure, so that it is actually got an S-shaped curve in it, and it remains erect most of the time, or quite erect, and is only comes out when that S-shaped curve is straightened out. So a little bit different than the anatomy of other animals. Okay, I just want to give you that brief introduction so you understand some of the jargon, and then the cow reproductive tract is shown here, both from a side view and a view from above. in these two views. And you can see that the reproductive tract of the cow is made up of the ovaries, the oviducts, and then the uterus. And it's on both sides, so there are two ovaries and two horns to the uterus. And then the cervix, which prevents foreign materials from entering into the uterus. To follow up on that, I'll tell you a little bit about the ovary and the cow's estrus cycle. This is a 21-day cycle, so once the cow calves, she will have a period of what we call anestrus, where she's not cycling, but then she'll resume this 21-day cycle. Ovulation occurs on day 1 of the cycle, as shown in this diagram, and that follicle, which is where the egg comes from, turns into what we call the corpus luteum. The corpus luteum forms and secretes primarily progesterone, which helps to maintain pregnancy. And if the egg is fertilized, a signal goes back to the cow to indicate that there is pregnancy and that the CL needs to be maintained to help to maintain that pregnancy. So that's the normal cycle. If the cow is not bred, is the egg would ovulate, and then after 21 days, the CL would regress, and the next follicle on the ovary would go ahead and ovulate and start the cycle again. Take a little bit more detailed look at the ovary so that you can understand a little bit about what's going on there on this 21-day cycle. There are follicles that develop all the time. They start as what we call primordial follicles, and then they grow. And if they get to a certain size, then they will continue to go ahead and develop and go on to ovulate, as shown in this diagram. So once they start to fill with fluid, they're called they are called an ovulatory follicle, and then in this final diagram, the egg is being ejected from the ovary, and then that follicle turns into what we described earlier, the corpus luteum. So that's the normal activity of the ovary, and it takes a while after calving or in heifer development for these ovaries to start functioning and to get in a good cycle in terms of their egg release and maintenance of the corpus luteum. So one thing that we get a lot of questions about is what should your reproductive rates be? In other words, what is a target for how many cows you get bred out of your herd? And this is a hard thing to kind of deal with, because the truth is that we expect there to be some open cows each time that we go through the breeding season. Our pregnancy rate, this being the number of cows bred per cows exposed to the bull, would be 90%. So this means that when we pull the bull after the breeding season and get the vet or someone to come help us to test them for pregnancy, that then that would be about 90% of the cows would be pregnant at that time. As far as calving rate goes, this is the number of cows that actually do deliver a calf. That would be about 88%. So about 2% of the cows are expected to normally regress and lose the pregnancy and come back around and try again. At weaning, we would hope to wean about 85% calves as a percentage of the cows originally exposed to the bull. And sometimes farmers get hung up on this because we oftentimes will have people say they have a very high breeding rate, but they are not necessarily counting cows that disappeared from the system because of being open or having other problems. So it's very important that we base this on the percent of cows that were exposed to the bull. Now, these are reasonable goals, and I have seen higher numbers, obviously, and it is possible, but it's very expensive. So to get a cow herd consistently above these targets might be more expensive than it's worth. And so you have to be a little bit cautious not to spend too much to try to get every single cow bred. This will allow us to cull cows that don't have good reproductive efficiency, and that will make room for younger cows that will be better than them in those characteristics. We don't want to keep an open cow ever, and I indicated that we should be pregnancy checking by palpation or possibly by blood testing. Both of those are options. And we should not keep those open cows around and give them a year off. It's simply too expensive to feed a cow for a whole year when we're not going to have a calf from her to sell. So in my own personal experience and working with other farmers, keeping an open cow is almost always a mistake. So there are many advanced reproductive technologies I'm sure you have heard of being interested in beef cattle production. The first and perhaps most important one to us is artificial insemination. It is critical for purebred producers because it allows us to use a much better bull than would be possible with natural service or with using a live bull on our farm. Through AI, we can get some of the best genetics that are available in the country, and depending on the number of cows you're breeding, it's very often possible to reduce the number of bulls that you have to run, which helps with the expense of that artificial insemination. The thing to note about artificial insemination is it does take practice. So small farmers generally do not do their own AI. Sometimes they do, but usually they use an AI technician from one of the semen companies that will come and help breed their cows as a part of their overall service. And young producers that are getting into this may want to consider artificial insemination, but certainly they should have a discussion with an advisor before they undertake such a venture. Estrus synchronization goes along with artificial insemination. Estrus synchronization is a system by which we use hormone therapy to make all the cows come in to heat on the same day. And this allows us to use an AI technician that would come by and visit the farm on the day that we know the cows are going to be in heat and ready to be bred. It allows better scheduling and is definitely a recommendation to any farmers that are using an artificial insemination system. Finally, embryo transfer is possible, and with this system, a cow is super ovulated and bred to a bull, and then we can get multiple embryos out of her. They're flushed out of the uterus, and then they can be implanted into other recipient cows that then birth and raise those calves that are the genetics from the donor parents. Now, this system is only for elite breeders. It's quite expensive, but can help to improve genetics quite rapidly. Now, this graphic shows what most beef farmers are doing at the current time. And as you can see, with heifers, about 80% of the farmers are using a bull only, and with the cow herd, about 95%. As far as AI only, you see there's very few farms that do only artificial insemination, but there are more that do artificial insemination and the bull. So about 10% of those farms, especially the ones breeding heifers, are using AI. So as I mentioned earlier, it's very critical that the reproductive preparation of the bull is in place so that he can breed those cows in a very short period of time. And to do this, you need to do a breeding soundness exam. Breeding soundness exams are a very important management tool. And to accomplish these tests, you will need to be in a relationship with a veterinarian because they're normally the ones that are going to have the equipment to be able to do this. We need to both make sure that bulls are ready to breed about 45 days before the breeding season, and this is so that we can go and obtain a replacement bull should the bull be proven infertile. The bull breeding soundness exam involves a semen check, which involves looking at the sperm to make sure that they are normal and that they can swim properly, both of those being important in their fertilization of the egg. We also want to do a physical exam on the bull, which involves looking at the soundness of his feet and legs, making sure that his eyes are good, that he can see, that he can walk well and walk around looking for cows, and also that he is gentle enough in temperament to where it's not going to be dangerous to enter the field where he is, and that's something that bulls can be dangerous especially if they're a little bit mean-tempered. The one thing to note on bulls and their breeding soundness exam is that it does not test for libido. So we still need the producer still needs to watch these cows and bulls and make sure that the bull is actually mounting and breeding cows. Now, heifers also should be examined before breeding. It doesn't need to be quite as far ahead of breeding as the bull. because of our lack, unlikely we will be seeking more heifers because of many of them failing, but for the most part we will just cull a few heifers from each herd. We want to do, again, a physical exam for soundness. Here it's very important to look at temperament. We don't want to keep a heifer that's going to be a mean cow, and we also want to make sure that these heifers have the same kind of characteristics that we want in our herd. Now, pelvic area is one of the main things that we will measure on these heifers, and this will help us to prevent major calving problems. Ensuring that the pelvis is large enough for a calf to get out of is a very critical first step in proving that the heifer will become a good cow. We also do what's called a reproductive tract score, and this score shows how close the heifer is to being able to conceive if she was bred by a bull. Now, this ranges from 1 to 5, 1 being a heifer that may never come into heat, may never have any sexual development, and 5 being one that is actively cycling. This needs to be done, again, 30 to 60 days before breeding and to allow us time to make management decisions. I want to say a little bit more about pelvic measures because one of the most difficult things, especially for beginning beef farmers, is dealing with calving problems. It's very disappointing when you get the cow bred and you raise her the 9 months of gestation only to have a baby that dies on birth. So we do need to be very careful about understanding this and how to minimize the incidence of calving problems. Shown on this slide is a rice pelvimeter. This little tool is used to go through the rectum of the cow, of the heifer, and then the bottom part is held together with the hand, and as this is dragged through the pelvic opening, it can help us measure the height and the width of that pelvic opening. Now, a little bit of data on this slide shows that heifers with a small pelvic area had a high incidence of calving problems. In this case, 80% of those very small pelvic area heifers had to be assisted with their calves, whereas those with larger pelvic areas in the same large kind of size calves had a lot less calving difficulty. With smaller calves, the same holds true, and those small pelvis heifers had, in this study, 42% problems, while the well-developed heifers had 19%. So still, you see there's no zeros here, and so heifers will have calving difficulty, and producers need to be aware that before they start to calve, they need to be watching them very carefully, and they need to have had some instruction and help in how to pull a calf. So as far as the birthing process, as I said, if you have cows, you will at some point pull calves. There's simply no farms that don't have any calving problems. But we can reduce it by using calving ease bulls. These would be bulls that have been selected to have a record for having no major problems with calving problems. We also can do the pelvic measures as mentioned on the earlier slide on the heifers, and that will reduce the number of easy pulls that we have. Sometimes a calf just isn't quite getting through the birth canal. The heifer may be a little bit small, but we can easily pull that calf out. Generally, if we do pelvic measures, then we can be assured that that calf that's coming normally, as shown in this top picture, is going to come right on out and not be a problem. However, we can't get rid of the situations where maybe there's a leg back or a head back that prevents the calf from moving normally through the birth canal, and then those will have to be assisted. So signs of abnormal presentation are something that you should study as a beef farmer and know what that looks like. This picture on this slide shows the calf and the normal presentation as it's being born. It dives into the world with its first thing you see is the front 2 feet. You'll see the water bag start to exit, and then you'll see the front 2 feet. Eventually, as the cow has contractions, you'll start to see the nose and perhaps the tongue sticking out. And usually once we get them past the head and the shoulders, then the calf slides on out quite easily. But in the normal process, this only occurs over about a 15 to 20 minute period. The calf is born and gets up and suckles and has the reflex to do that. Now, if you have to assist the cow with the calf, then we use a stainless steel chain called an obstetrical chain and a little hook handle. And essentially in the bottom panel you see that the chain has been put on the foot of the calf, because typically we find this calf with a foot or two out. And then that can be used to provide traction onto the calf. So to do this you need the proper OB chains and handles. You also need some lubrication, something like a KY jelly or other water-based lubricant works well. And then towels at the ready, because we do want to make sure that this calf is dried off and cleaned off, and that the mother has close access to him shortly after birth. One thing to note, that if the calf can't be pulled by two adults by hand, then it's time to get the veterinarian. Not all calving difficulties can be resolved by the farmer, and sometimes the vet has to be called. So make sure that you study and learn what's an abnormal presentation look like. If you see only the 2 feet and you never see the nose or the tongue, that's an indication something's wrong, as well as if you see a back foot or you see just a head or something like that. So be learning and studying those malpresentations, and be aware that you need to have a vet available to you should you have calving problems. So in summary, I've given you a very brief introduction to beef cattle reproductive management, and it is key to a productive beef cattle farm. Maintaining body condition is the #1 management practice for getting cows cycling early after calving, and we need to focus on that and learn that for many reasons on our farm. Advanced technologies are great for reproduction. We have a lot of good ones out there, but they're probably somewhat distracting for new producers. So my general recommendation is to wait a year or two after you get into the business before even considering using any kind of advanced technology. Breeding soundness exams for heifers and bulls are highly recommended, and because of this you need to have a relationship with your veterinarian that we will mention in the health and well-being presentation as well. And we also need to be choosing calving age bulls and measure pelvic areas to minimize our dystocia. Dystocia is the one event or the one thing that happens that really is challenging for new producers, and we need to do everything we can to prevent it, and then we need to recognize it when it happens and call someone to get help.